Moscow, Idaho. It's a quiet college town, right? The kind of place where the biggest news on a Sunday is usually a football game. But in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, that peace was just shattered. We're going to deconstruct the case that absolutely gripped the nation, a case that exposed this terrifying line between academic curiosity and what's alleged to be a deadly obsession. So that morning, the news started to trickle out. Four bright, promising students, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, they were gone. The scene inside their home on King Road sent this shockwave of fear, not just through the town, but really around the world. Because suddenly you had this horrible mystery with no weapon, no suspect, and absolutely no motive. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the night of the murders itself, then follow that trail of evidence. We're going to look inside the mind of the accused, feel the family's pain, understand the battle happening in court, and then we'll be left with those big, unanswered questions that still hang over this whole thing. Okay, so let's go back to that Saturday night. For the victims, it was just a normal night, the kind of evening that's totally typical for any college student. You can see it laid out here, just these last ordinary moments. Ethan and Xana were at a frat party. Kaylee and Madison were out at a bar, then grabbed some late-night food. By about 2 a.m., everyone was home. But then, just 2 hours later, the timeline takes this incredibly dark turn. A DoorDash delivery shows up, and then at 4:17 a.m., a neighbor's security camera picks up this distorted audio. A whimper, a thud, a dog barking. Just 3 minutes later, a white sedan is caught on camera speeding away. In that tiny window, a home that was full of life became a horrific crime scene. Now, for weeks, this case was a total mystery. It was fueling all this fear and wild speculation online. But behind the scenes, investigators were working, meticulously putting together a puzzle that would eventually lead them to just one person. And this was the mistake. The one piece of evidence that changed everything. In all the chaos of the crime scene, the killer left behind this leather knife sheath right there on the bed. It was the kind of slip-up that can break a case wide open. And right there on the button snap of that sheath, forensics found DNA from one single male. That's it. This one tiny genetic fingerprint became the absolute cornerstone of the entire investigation. It was the thread that was going to unravel the whole thing. So investigators built their case on what you could call 4 pillars. First, that DNA. They got a familial match by secretly collecting trash from the suspect's family home in Pennsylvania. Second, the car. A huge search of surveillance footage tracked a white Hyundai Elantra circling the house right before the attack. Third, the cell phone data, which pinged the suspect's phone near the victim's home at least a dozen times before that night. And finally, you have the chilling eyewitness account from a surviving roommate who saw a masked figure walk right past her door. All of these pieces started to click into place, and they all pointed to one man, Bryan Kohberger. And this is where the story takes this deeply unsettling turn. The guy at the center of this massive manhunt wasn't some random person. He was a PhD student who was literally studying the very nature of crime itself. I mean, look at this. It's like 2 completely different people. On one hand, you've got the academic. He was described as a brilliant student, and he was studying under a well-known expert on serial killers. But then, you look at his digital footprint, and it tells a whole different story. A fascination with Ted Bundy, disturbing searches, and obsessively checking for news about the murders. It really suggests a dark obsession was hiding right there in plain sight, just masked by academic ambition. And this quote just captures that blurred line perfectly. This is from a Reddit survey he put out for a research project before the murders. He said he wanted to understand how criminals think and feel when they commit a crime. Looking back on it now, it reads less like a research project and more like a chilling personal quest. So the big question is, why? We still don't have a clear motive, but a few theories have started to form. Some people point to a kind of getting even motive, maybe fueled by resentment from being bullied by girls when he was younger. Others think it could be a twisted academic challenge, a desire to commit the perfect crime and outsmart the very system he was studying. All of this is woven together with this history of social awkwardness, past struggles with addiction, and a personality that people described as both brilliant and, well, confrontational.
But while the world has been so focused on the killer's mind, we can't forget that 4 families have been living through an unimaginable nightmare. And for them, the long road to justice has been another source of pain and, at times, division.
The journey to a trial has been incredibly hard on the families. The Gonzalez family, for instance, has been very clear that they are against any kind of plea deal that would take the death penalty off the table. Kaylee's sister Aubrey put it powerfully here, saying they feel the system has failed them, and that since their loved ones were silenced, their killer should face the ultimate penalty. But then, in contrast, you have other families who are just focused on finding some kind of closure, no matter what the legal outcome is. Ethan Chapin's father, Jim, talked about just how exhausting this whole legal process has been and the need for his family to one day just move on. It's a heartbreaking reminder that closure means something really different for everyone who's been touched by a tragedy like this. Okay, so as the case moves forward, the courtroom is basically setting up to be a battlefield for 2 competing stories. One of them is built on cold, hard science, and the other is built on psychology. So in one corner, you've got the prosecution. Their story is pretty straightforward. This was a calculated planner who used what he learned in school to meticulously plot a quadruple murder, and in the process, left behind a mountain of digital and forensic evidence. Then, in the other corner, you have the defense. They're countering by challenging those forensic procedures, and really importantly, they're introducing this psychological narrative about Kohberger's own mental state.
A huge piece of the defense's strategy is Kohberger's diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder. In court filings, they've described him as having extremely rigid thinking and little insight into his own behaviors. Now, it is absolutely critical to say this. ASD is not linked to violent behavior. The defense isn't using it as an excuse for the crime, but rather as a mitigating factor to argue that he shouldn't face the death penalty.
And that's the thing. Even as this case moves toward a trial, a lot of the most disturbing questions, well, they might never get answered. A courtroom focuses on guilt or innocence, but that deeper why, that might just stay out of reach, leaving this really unsettling legacy. I mean, think about it. We still don't have a clear motive. We don't know if there was a primary target or if the attack just tragically spiraled. We have no idea if he ever had any contact with them before that night or why he was drawn to that specific house on King Road. These are the huge voids of information that everyone is hoping a trial will finally start to fill. You know, there's a reason this case captured the world's attention. It sits at this chilling crossroads. It's a story about the incredible power of modern forensics to solve what seemed like an impossible crime. But it's also a story about abnormal psychology and, let's be honest, our own deep and sometimes uncomfortable fascination with the minds of killers. And that really leaves us with this one final haunting question. Bryan Kohberger dedicated his academic life to studying crime. The evidence the prosecution says suggests he then crossed a line that most of us can't even imagine. It forces us to ask, how thin is that veil between intellectual fascination and a deadly obsession? And what happens when someone decides to stop studying the subject and start practicing it?